Now, the Budget Justice Coalition, which comprises various civil society groups, said over the past 5 years, resources for public services have been cut, while additional public funds have been channeled towards poorly managed and non-performing state-owned entities. The coalition said decision-making around the budget must consider the voice of ordinary South Africans. Joining me tonight on this very subject, Dominique Brown from the Budget Justice Coalition. Dominique, one of the things that you're calling for is an alternative budget, which you have called a human rights budget. How fundamentally different is it in approach to what the finance minister is going to be taking?
It's remarkably different. We envision that on top of the budget cuts that we've seen from the medium-term budget policy statement announced in October last year and budget cuts announced at the February budget this year, we expect greater budget cuts to be announced in the coming period. And for us, we think that this is a bad way to manage the debt. First of all, because it is detrimental to the advancement of human rights, and it impedes the country from advancing and protecting socio-economic rights. Secondly, we think that this is a bad way of dealing with the debt because it will fail even by its own measure. So by government reducing spending and cutting the budget further to address the debt, it will invariably result in a contraction or further contraction of the economy, which ultimately results in a growing of the debt to GDP ratio. And so in this way, this approach is bound to even fail by its own standards.
For the longest time, there were complaints around the skyrocketing government spending, and there were calls for greater austerity. When that happened a couple of years ago, or at least there were signals towards it, it was much welcomed. You are now saying that the austerity budgeting needs to be completely abandoned.
Yes, and fiscal consolidation by Treasury's own accounts in the 2012-2013 budget. Of course, this is intensified in the recent period where more than 100 billion was announced to be cut from the infrastructure budgets, municipal infrastructure, education infrastructure, and health infrastructure, as well as in February, 160 billion rand being cut from the public sector wage bill over the next 3 years. So these cuts have been coming on for some time in real terms. For instance, when we look at spending to education and you account for consumer price inflation as well as for the population growth rate, then in actual fact spending on education is stagnant and even declining year on year. And this declining spending is really what's behind the deterioration. Well, in addition to corruption, the declining spending is what's behind the deteriorating social services and the growing level of unemployment in the country. And of course, we know this reinforces many of the social crises, not least alcohol abuse and the kinds of gender-based violence and violence against women that's so endemic to South Africa.
When one looks at the other suggestions that you've made, just to name a few, you've called for the extension and the top-up of grants. You've also called for a universal basic income grant, some resourcing for environmental protection, etc. These are fundamentally things that would require a lot of money. Where do you propose that the money to be able to help realize the budget that you've put on the table would come from?
Yes. So, as you say, we are proposing much greater spending through a fiscal stimulus that prioritizes social services and infrastructure. So in the first instance, we think that this investment pays off in the long run, as by investing in these things, you not only provide for people's needs, but you will also ensure that that there will be aggregate demand within the economy going forward. We also think that there's a large level of domestic resources that we can tap into and utilize, not least through the eradication of corruption and wasteful expenditure, but also looking to enhance the progressivity of the South African tax framework. And in this way, we look and say we should be looking to a net wealth tax, which we think would be able to bring about large pools of revenue. But moreover, we think that we should also be looking to tax the income derived from wealth, increasing the levels of the capital gains taxes. And over and above that, we also think that government should be setting the moral high ground by looking to taxing more greatly high net worth individuals. And there are a number of other additional proposals that we make as to where resources can be located. For instance, a moratorium for a short period for government and for workers halting contributions to the pension fund for the next 3 years could save in excess of 120 billion rand without putting the pension fund at any risk at all. And of course, by SARS's own accounts and by a recent statement by the Financial Intelligence Center, South Africa loses more between $10 billion and $25 billion as a result of illicit financial flows each year. These are multinational corporations who are shifting profits out of the country. Greater enforcement and regulation of the general anti-avoidance rule can also raise large pools of revenue through the clamping down of profit shifting and wage evasion. So there's actually a large amount of resources available for fiscal stimulus that can be the basis for a human rights budget, or what we call Imali.
All right, Dominique Brown from the Budget Justice Coalition. Let's leave it there for tonight.